Hello, I'm Gloria, and this is Miss K from CCBC, um, actually my professor for English 101 and English 102. So today we're doing an interview on the assassination of Martin Luther King, and today is November 29th, 2011. So, Miss K, what do you remember about the civil rights movement and the role of leaders like Martin Luther King in the movement?
Okay. What I remember, when Martin Luther King, when I first started to know about him, I guess I was around 10.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother and father would talk about him and what was going on in the South. And they were very, very pleased with the work he was doing in order to bring civil rights to African Americans. So when I first heard about him, he was like this mysterious man that was doing a lot for the black community.
Okay.
My parents were really proud of him, and we actually did see some of the early television newscasts of people being sprayed with water hoses and protesters being herded into police vans.
Okay.
And so we would watch the evening news, and people were being hurt. And I just remember being a little girl and feeling scared of that, that people were being hurt, but they were black people trying to get rights for all of us. So I remember that really clearly.
So you remember racism at the time? How was it? What was the tension like among the African American population?
Well, my parents tried to shield us from it as much as possible.
Okay.
My mother would tell us stories, especially as we got older, about what we could do. Like she could not go into the front door of certain stores downtown, Baltimore, like Hat Company and Stewart's. You had to go in through the alley, and they had a colored entrance. They had a place for colored people to go in. That's what they were called at the time. And she would tell us these stories about how you would go shopping and you couldn't try your clothes on, you couldn't try your shoes on or anything, and that you just have to buy them and hope that they were fit. And so you couldn't eat downtown. There was nowhere to eat because they wouldn't allow black people to eat at the different lunch counters. And I do remember when we would go on trips that my parents would make sure that we always had food packed, because there were a lot of places we could stop and eat on the way. But as I got older, because I was living in the midst of the movement, things began to really change. And because our parents shielded us so much, we really didn't see a lot of the overt racism. They saw it more than we did, and they would talk about it. My parents would talk, being really proud of them. And I wasn't around a lot of white people. Again,
So,
we lived in, at that time, Baltimore was very segregated, still is in a way, but it was very segregated, and so, but black people were living, a lot of black people could live in nice communities, and we lived in a really nice working class / middle class black community, so we didn't really run into white people very often, except going to certain stores, etc.
They didn't create any disturbance or civil, nobody.
No, not
as
with
far as white people that didn't start some.
It's funny because I remember more as I got older. So closer to the time when he was killed.
So that's actually the next question. What do you remember about the assassination that day on April 4th?
I remember my mother being really, really upset. I remember seeing adults cry. The women in the neighborhood were very upset about it. The men were too, but the women were crying. And people were angry.
Was it really huge on the media? Was it like a breaking news kind of?
Yes, and my mother saved the newspapers from that day. It was huge. It was a huge news story, and I do remember people just being very upset. And my mother stayed home from work and kept us in the house because actually that's when the riots started. And there were, as the week went by, the days after, up to his funeral, there were, you know, people were setting buildings on fire, mainly on North Avenue in Baltimore, and I guess other retail districts in the black community. And they were burning, you know, it was like Baltimore was burning, just like a lot of cities.
Right.
And my mother and father were very protective and told us we couldn't go outside. We couldn't, if we went outside, we had to stay on the block. We couldn't go to North Avenue because it was dangerous.
Right.
And they actually had National Guard out, which was, you know, the National Guard reservists were out and riding up and down the street in their Jeeps, and so it was scary. It was actually a very scary time.
And I saw that they actually set even a curfew at 6 p.m. So everybody had to be in the house at 6 p.m. And
there was a curfew, and it lasted for it seemed like it lasted a long time to me, at least a couple of weeks. And that summer was bad too, because people were just really angry because, you know, you had Martin Luther King was this peaceful person, and you had someone shoot him, and also there were all these other assassinations before him, so people were very sensitive.
Right.
You know, I even remember, even though I was like 8, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and being in school and teachers crying and sending us home from school early, and it was the same kind of reaction, except for when King died, black people were just really angry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And so, like in city like Baltimore, what you said? How long did it last? The riot?
It seemed like it was a couple of weeks. I don't
weeks?
know exactly, but it went on for days, and the curfew, like you said, we couldn't go places. But mainly, I just was aware that our parents were really trying to protect us.
Okay.
Yeah, and keep us in the house and keeping us in the block and. No, you can't go, and we were really curious, so we didn't get to see anything until after. And then when we went to like where all the retail district was in our neighborhood, which is along North Avenue, from like where Coppin University up to Hilton Street, there was a lot of burned out buildings and you know, trashed. It was all trashed and everything, and I just remember it looked really like a war had gone on. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is and what happened actually after the movement, the civil rights movement at the time? What were the reactions? What did they do on their part? Like, you know, they lost the leader. So
then the movement changed. Right. The tone of the movement changed, and that's when you began to see Black Power. Really, after King died, I know historically that Black Power even started before then. That a lot of young people who were involved in the civil rights movement started to get very disenchanted with the whole idea of turning the other cheek. And so even before King died, you know, like in 1966, you had Stokely Carmichael and other people begin to say Black Power.
Right.
And so the movement really changed. It changed from that peaceful, just marching and protests to people walking around with guns, the Black Panthers. We had Black Panthers in Baltimore. And the young people really looked up to the Panthers and really looked up to the people who were trying to do it differently. I remember by that time in junior high school, a good friend of mine had a Panther button, and she said, I can never wear it at home, my father would kill me. But young people really began to feel like we needed to get power a different way. And so the movement really changed after King died. It was really much more confrontational. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that ends our interview.
Oh,
Thank you so much for doing this, Ms. K.